Lesson 7, Making a Mummy. So today, after finishing up past notes, mostly today we read and talked about how Egyptian mummies were made and why it is that Egyptians mummified their dead. There were some video clips as well, and we watched the CNN 10 with any extra time. The I can statement was I can describe the steps of the embalming process. So we're going to go through this mummification really quickly. If you want to go through and read all the slides, you can click through the Nearpod just below and it'll have all the slides in there. You can go at your own pace. So this was written by Michael Smock. We're going to go through it real quick. The main reason that the Egyptians mummified their dead is that they believed that when you died, your spirit would go kind of to a heaven-like place during the day, but at night your spirit had to come back to your body. Your spirit would come and go. And so in order to have an afterlife, your spirit needed to have a place to come sleep during the night. And it would have to be able to have a body to sleep in and also to be able to recognize which body had been its body back in its earth life. And so they really wanted to mummify these bodies so that their spirits would have a place to sleep during the day. Basically, a spirit must recognize its body. And so in order to have an afterlife at all, they needed to do mummification. So the mummification process took about 70 days. And they would shave the body and remove all the decaying parts. And oftentimes they would remove the brain through the nose using a long hook. The hook was used to kind of stir up the brain, and then it would flow or ooze out of the nasal cavity. They just really didn't recognize the significance of the brain. They thought that the brain produced snot for the nose and that it wasn't a very important organ, so the brain was removed with a hook. Next up, they would cut an incision kind of in the abdomen area and take out all the soft body parts that would decay, like the lungs and the stomach, the liver, and the intestines. Sometimes they remove the heart, sometimes not. Some mummies have it gone, and sometimes it's still left in. They did believe that the heart was the seat of the soul that you would need during the judgment at the end. Afterwards, the body was stuffed with bundles of a drying salt, which is called natron. It's kind of a naturally occurring salt in Egypt. Then they would cover the outside of the body also with natron and kind of put the body up on a slanted couch so that the fluids could ooze out. Now, while the body itself was drying, they would also dry and preserve all the organs they had removed, and those dried organs would eventually be put in what's called canopic jars or canopic jars, like the ones seen here. According to Egyptian mythology, Osiris, he was the first mummy. He was murdered by his brother Set and cut into pieces, and his wife Isis went around and gathered up all the pieces and put them together as a mummy and did some magic, and he was restored and is now the god of the afterlife. Now, the canopic jars, there's 4 of them, and they have different shaped lids, and they represent the 4 sons of Horus to watch over each organ. There's a jackal, a falcon, a baboon, and a human-headed canopic jar. Now, canopic jars were then usually put into a chest that was then also stored with the mummy. After 40 days, the body was all shrunken out and dried, and the skin was kind of leathery. And so what they would do is rub the skin with oils at this time, which would really soften up the skin and make it more lifelike, which would be a strange job to have. Then, because the body was all sunken in, they would have to pack the inside with herbs and sawdust that would help to make it smell a little bit better and also to give it some more volume and shape and more of a lifelike appearance. Where the eyes had decayed, obviously the eyes are mostly made out of water, so they would decay. They would put small stones or even small onions under the eyelids to make it look like the mummy had eyes and make it really lifelike. Now, in Egyptian mythology, the god Horus, his eye was lost as he was battling his brother Set, or his uncle Set. So his eye was damaged, but his eye was magically restored, and so the eye of Horus, called a wedjat, is believed to have magical healing powers. And so they would always put a little wax or bronze or a clay wedjat on the body in that place where they had made the big cut, and that would help to magically heal the cut they had made in the afterlife. Now begins the wrapping. They would start wrapping the mummy again and again with strips of linen, and they also kind of glue them with resin in between and tree sap, and it could take up to a week to wrap a mummy. And in between several of the layers, they would put small magical amulets, stones, and things that had been carved, and insert those in between all the layers. Now, after the mummy was all wrapped, then oftentimes they would put a portrait mask on top. And a portrait mask could be solid gold, like the famous portrait mask of King Tut, or they could be carved out of wood or even made out of clay and painted based on how much money the person had who was being mummified. And then the mummy was placed into a series of coffins, different sized sarcophagus, that are like nesting coffins, so they get progressively larger and fit inside of each other. And on the day of the funeral, the mummy would be brought to the tomb, and they would do the opening of the mouth ritual, where they would say magic spells and touch the eyes and nose and mouth of the coffin with this sacred tool that would reactivate those senses for the afterlife. And finally, before the tomb was sealed, family members would bring all sorts of things you might need for the afterlife, such as your clothes and furniture and even food and dishes. Inside the tombs, there are often scenes of people, bringing offerings to the tombs, and they painted the walls to provide kind of a comforting environment and familiar surroundings for the person who died. And then after the tombs were closed up, some wealthy families hired priests to come back and continue offering food to the deceased person continually. And as we visit our graves, the Egyptians would visit the family members' graves during special holidays as well. The end.